So I'm just going to begin this commentary by saying that I was not expecting to get commentary material from a video where a guy cooks every president's favorite food. But in the same regard, I don't watch videos on every president's favorite food and expect to find comments like this.
Our 15th president was James Buchanan, and his favorite food was sauerkraut. This man tried to mediate the North and the South, but ultimately failed in preventing the Civil War. I imagine that failure had something to do with his poor decision-making skills as reflected by his choice in food.
Okay, first off, he didn't actually do all that much to attempt to alleviate tensions. He was under the impression the Supreme Court had completely settled the slavery issue with the Dred Scott case. That turned out to not be what happened. And when states began seceding, he didn't respond because he did not believe the Constitution gave him the power to prevent them from doing such. But second off, and this is a more important point in my mind, what in the ever-loving fuck are you going on about? I don't like sauerkraut myself, but that was just an incredibly tasteless comment, and it's not his only one.
Harry Truman was the 33rd president, and wait, am I hearing that correctly? His favorite food was a well-done steak? Okay, viewer discretion is advised as we cook this well-done steak, but to give us the best chance, I'm using this dry-aged brisket point. I'll start by slicing right down the middle to see what we got. Truman was the only president to make use of an atomic bomb in warfare, but I'd say by far his most notorious characteristic is his choice of steak.
I'd say personally it's his use of the atomic bomb. That seems far more important to me than the kind of food that he eats. Like, genuinely, I don't even know how to respond to something like that. But okay, insensitive comments put to the side, what is wrong with this video? Well, the answer is quite a bit. So, this video is called I Cooked Every President's Favorite Food. And he just objectively doesn't do that. On one occasion, he cooks a completely different type of meat than what the president's favorite food was.
Number 9 is William Henry Harrison, and believe it or not, his favorite food was squirrel stew. Now, I couldn't find a squirrel, so instead we're using a rabbit.
Given rabbits and squirrels are different animals, cooking a rabbit instead of a squirrel is not making every president's favorite food. Also, he counts this twice.
Number 20 was James Garfield, and somehow his favorite food was also squirrel stew. But what it means is it's another 5.3 for the Republican.
But the graphic you put up on screen says squirrel soup, not squirrel stew. And by the way, you guys didn't make squirrel stew, you made rabbit stew. And by the way, for those who think I'm over-focusing on the fact that squirrel and rabbit are different animals and therefore different meat, that's something the video itself ends up acknowledging.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be squirrel, but
if that was actually squirrel meat, it probably would have been way worse.
Side note, I'm also forced to wonder where exactly they're getting the information on every president's favorite food. You guys already heard Max's opinion on Harry Truman's habit of eating well-done steaks, but one thing that's never actually brought up is why he ate well-done steaks. It's because he didn't want to gain any weight, once saying that this lifestyle allowed him to wear the same suits as he wore back in 1935. Given he was ranked the poorest president in United States history, you can imagine he was rather conscious about his money. However, that part of history is not even acknowledged by Max as he judges President Truman's eating habits. Instead, he just says things like this.
Steak should not be cooked to well done, under any circumstances.
There are other issues I have with how the favorite food category is just treated as this static thing where there can be only one option, including, in one occasion, a drink.
The second US president is John Adams, and his favorite food is hard cider.
But the nuances of why people eat the way they do is never really addressed. Here's another example. And this one comes from them talking about Richard Nixon.
Our 37th president is Richard Nixon, and I had to do a double take here because apparently his favorite food is cottage cheese mixed with ketchup.
Now, the video blasts this combination as absolutely disgusting.
I'm a pretty open-minded eater, but that is just wild.
Get your sloppy.
Get your slop. There's only one thing in my head that sounds worse than putting ketchup on a steak, and that is putting ketchup on cottage cheese.
I already don't like cottage cheese. I'm honest, I might tap out on this.
No, you signed up. No,
Oh,
It's not horrible.
it's not good.
It's not good.
dude, that was one of the worst things I've ever eaten in my life.
But do you know who also found this exact combination to be kinda gross? Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon didn't even like cottage cheese and only ate it as a way of keeping his weight down after being recommended to do such by a doctor. And he put ketchup on it because it was essentially the only way he could even tolerate it. And none of this is even getting into the various historical inaccuracies regarding how the food in question is prepared. Take this part, for example.
Our third U.S. president was Thomas Jefferson, and his favorite food was mac and cheese.
Okay, so Max, I see you got a box of Crafts there, and I don't know if you know this, but Crafts didn't exist when Thomas Jefferson was alive. Kraft began selling its macaroni and cheese in 1937, long after Jefferson had died. You can find Thomas Jefferson's macaroni and cheese recipe on the internet, by the way. So what exactly is the point in not using it and instead just buying some Kraft? And this isn't even the only example of him doing this, by the way. Slightly later in the video, we get this.
James Monroe was the 5th U.S. president, and his favorite food was fried chicken.
Although that is true, he didn't really seem to have an opinion on Popeye's fried chicken, given the Popeyes franchise didn't launch until 1972. Sandwiched in between these misunderstandings of Jefferson and Monroe is this misunderstanding of James Madison.
The 4th U.S. president is James Madison, and his favorite food is ice cream.
So looking at the video, it appears that Max is just having some generic vanilla ice cream. However, James Monroe didn't eat vanilla ice cream. We actually don't know what Monroe's favorite flavor was, although his wife was particularly fond of oyster ice cream. And this is especially bothersome given just how broad the category of ice cream actually is. Remember, there are over 1,000 different flavors of ice cream in existence. If you're going to be making every president's favorite food, and one of the presidents had ice cream as their favorite food, you have to make sure you're actually picking their favorite flavor, or else you might be using a flavor they completely hate for the sake of sampling. And by the way, none of those were the worst offender of the president didn't fucking eat that. That dishonor would go to this.
Number 27 was William Taft, whose favorite food was steak and potatoes. And for the steak, we have an ancient relic from deep in my meat freezer. Some of you guys might remember this. It is from 2021, the Sour Patch Dry Age. Will this thing still be edible? Honestly, I have no idea. The crazy thing is, it still smells exactly like Sour Patch Kids.
Okay, this should go without saying. However, William Howard Taft, who died in 1930, didn't dry age his steak with a food that was first invented in the late 1970s. And by the way, he specifically goes on to note how it differs from a regular steak.
And as expected, we have a ton of extra caramelization due to that sugar content.
Gee, it's like this isn't representative of what steaks are typically like when eaten. And remember, he made the well-done steak as Truman liked it, despite him knowing that he wasn't going to enjoy eating that ahead of time. So it's not as if he doesn't care for historical accuracy. Occasionally he does. But other times he just is dedicated to doing anything that isn't accurate. Are you really telling me it was that hard to get a steak that you hadn't previously dry-aged in Sour Patch Kids? I know it sounds like I'm harping on this because I am, but that's primarily because of just how much this decision baffles me. Oh, and after this, he makes a chicken pot pie terribly.
Number 29 was Warren Harding, and his favorite food was chicken pot pie. Clearly, I have a lot of work to do when it comes to making a proper chicken pot pie. This is a mess. I don't know what happened here.
It looks like you dropped it on the floor.
Is it safe to eat?
That chicken pot pie is terrible.
That's not a good chicken pot pie.
One thing I haven't talked about yet is they rate every single food they eat in this video, they being Max and 2 other people, and keep track of which political party had the better food choice, I guess. Now, already doing this throughout the entirety of United States history is going to create some problems because the political parties today do not look like they always have. Theodore Roosevelt was a Republican, for example, as is Donald Trump. Theodore Roosevelt was a progressive, even joining the Progressive Party in 1912 after he was unable to secure the nomination for the Republican Party from the president at the time, William Howard Taft. You know, the guy whose favorite steak was notable for not being dry-aged in Sour Patch Kids. Sorry, I'm still on that. Donald Trump's White House was in charge of the 1776 report, which listed progressivism as a challenge to American values. Writing on progressive ideas of how government should function, based on this false understanding of rights, the progressives designed a new system of government. Instead of securing fundamental rights grounded in nature, government, operating under a new theory of the living Constitution, should constantly evolve to secure evolving rights. In order to keep up with these changes, government would be run more and more by credentialed managers who would direct society through rules and regulations that mold to the currents of the time. Before he became President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson laid out this system whereby, quote, the functions of government are in a very real sense independent of legislation and even constitutions, meaning that this new view of government would operate independent of the people. Far from creating an omniscient body of civil servants led only by pragmatism or science, though, progressives instead created what amounted to a fourth branch of government called at times the bureaucracy or the administrative state. This shadow government never faces elections and today operates largely without checks and balances. The founders always opposed government unaccountable to the people and without constitutional restraint, yet it continues to grow around us. However, this gets even more complicated when you look at political parties that no longer exist. Early on in the video, for example, Max says this.
Now, George Washington was a Federalist, which is more closely aligned with the Democratic Party. So for our first Democratic food...
Cheers.
Okay, first off, George Washington was not a Federalist, he was an independent, who believed that political parties shouldn't exist, famously saying in his farewell address in 1796, however political parties may now and then answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. But also, how were the Federalists closer to the Democrats than the Republicans? I'm not even saying you're wrong, I would just like some evidence to back up this claim. Anyway, here's Max's in-depth commentary on hard cider.
It's super sweet, but kind of has like a fermented aftertaste.
Yes, the alcoholic drink tastes fermented. Who would have thought?
Andrew Jackson's face is on the $20 bill, and he apparently had a giant 1,400-pound block of cheese in the White House. I don't know, this guy kind of sounds like an idiot. Who would ever buy that much cheese?
He didn't, he was actually gifted it, and by the way, he wasn't even the only president to do such. Thomas Jefferson received the exact same gift during his administration.
The 25th president was William McKinley, and his favorite food were eggs. Was eggs? Grammar. For reference, a carton of eggs back in his day cost a mere 20 cents.
Which, when adjusted for inflation, is equivalent to about $7.60 in today's money. meaning they were actually more expensive than the $6 a carton you list as the price today. Anyway, final thoughts. Although Max may be a meat guy, he doesn't appear to be a presidential history guy. Good night and good luck.